He's spoken in Canada, Italy, Australia, Greece, the United Nations, and England.
You can be a genius, but if you don't have the creativity to put that knowledge to use, then you're just as good as my smartphone.
So you were goofing off like kids do by reading scientific articles, yes. I know high school freshmen.
Gordon E. Moore Award in the category of medicine and
Delegates, please give a huge hero's welcome to Jack Andraka.
Oh man, you guys are the reason why I loved coming here. So I'm now a Nat Geo explorer, and a lot of my research focuses on doing public health through big data, electrical engineering, and anthropology. And those things seem completely different, and my parents always ask me, why are you in anthropology? Like, what on earth are you doing? However, by the end of this talk, you guys will have heard 2 stories and learned how those all connect together. So the very first story is how I got interested in medicine. And it really began when I was 13 years old, when a close family friend, who's like an uncle to me, passed away from pancreatic cancer. And when the disease hit so close to home, I knew I needed to learn more. So I went online to find answers. And using just Google and Wikipedia, I found all sorts of statistics on pancreatic cancer. But what I found really shocked me. You see, 85% of all pancreatic cancers are diagnosed late, when some has less than a 2% chance of survival. And as I dug deeper, I was wondering, why on earth are we so bad at detecting these cancers? And that's when I found an even more shocking statistic. The current test is 60 years old. I mean, first off, that's older than my dad, but also costs $800 per test, and it's grossly inaccurate. It misses 30% of all pancreatic cancers. And your doctor typically won't order this unless they're ridiculously suspicious that you have the disease. So most of these cancers go undiagnosed. And so I was sitting there and I was like, there has to be a better way. So I set out, armed with 8th grade biology, to change the face of cancer diagnostics. And it was a bit lofty of a goal, but my kind of thinking was, the current test sucks so much that anything I do will probably be marginally better. And so armed with this kind of optimistic go-getter attitude, I set out, and I soon found why we haven't updated our test in over 6 decades. And this is because when we're looking for these cancers, we're looking at your bloodstream, particularly for these variations in protein levels. And while this sounds really straightforward, it's anything but. Because you have liters and liters of blood that's already abundant in thousands of different proteins. And you're looking for this tiny change in a tiny amount of a single protein. It's next to impossible. It's like trying to find a needle in a stack of nearly identical needles. And so what we really needed out of finding this one test for pancreatic cancer, what this one protein that we had to find, it had to satisfy all these criteria. It had to be an inexpensive way to detect it. It had to be rapid, sensitive, simple, or sensitive, selective, and minimally invasive. And I was pretty sure I could do this. I wasn't exactly sure how, so I kept digging into all these proteins, figuring out which one could work. And that's when I found a database of over 8,000 proteins that are found in your bloodstream when you have these cancers. And it was my summer break. I had nothing else to do, so I shut myself in my room and researched all 8,000 proteins. And it was a lot like playing Pokemon, but instead of gotta catch them all, it was gotta research them all. And it made for some really interesting back-to-school essays. My teachers were always like, what did you do this summer? And all of my friends were like, we went swimming, or we went to summer camp. And I'm like, I researched proteins. Always a really awkward pause after that, and I never shook the nickname Protein Kid. However, I continued on, and finally, on the 4,000th try, when I was close to losing my sanity, I finally found one protein that could work. And the name of this protein was mesothelin. And it's just your ordinary, run-of-the-mill type protein, unless you have pancreatic, ovarian, or lung cancer, in which case it's found at these very high levels in your bloodstream. But also, the key is that it's found in the earliest stages of the disease, when someone has close to 100% chance of survival. So if you could detect this protein, you could detect the cancer when survival is at its best. But now the question was, how on earth am I going to do this? And my kind of big breakthrough came in the most unexpected of places, my high school biology class, the absolute stifler of innovation. Because I absolutely hated my biology teacher. I was like, I know biology. And she's like, no, you don't. You have to study. And so one day, tensions rose to record highs, and I decided to rebel how any self-respecting kid would. I smuggled in an article on single-walled carbon nanotubes. You can really tell I was like the bad kid on monkey bars. But basically what these single-walled carbon nanotubes are, they're these long, thin tubes of carbon. They're single atom thick, and they're 1/50,000th of the diameter of a single strand of your hair. So they're extremely small. But they have these incredible properties. They're kind of like the superheroes of material science. Like they can conduct electricity better than copper. They're stronger than steel. They have all these really neat properties. And I was pretty much obsessed with them. So I smuggled in this article, wedged between the pages of my biology textbook, had that tucked under my desk, thought I was being really sneaky about it, and I was reading about these properties of these nanotubes. And at the same time in my biology class, we were learning about these things called antibodies. And an antibody, you can think of it like a lock and key. It will only react to one specific protein, in this case that cancer biomarker, mesothelin. But also, what you can do with these antibodies is you can mix them together with this carbon substance. And what you end up with these carbon nanotubes, and you end up with a carbon substance that will only react to one specific protein, in this case that cancer biomarker. But also what will happen is due to the amazing electrical properties of these nanotubes, actually change how electricity flows through them based on the amount of protein present, and thus indicate whether or not someone has pancreatic cancer. And so what you could do is if you layer this onto some paper or really anything, you basically have a test for pancreatic cancer. And it's as simple as making chocolate chip cookies, because all you do is you take some water, you pour in some nanotubes, add some antibodies, mix it up, take some paper, dip it, dry it, and you can detect cancer. It's literally as simple as that. And I had this idea, but now I was thinking, well, I have to do this research somewhere, because I couldn't do this on my kitchen countertop. My mom had kind of banned me from doing research at my house after some couple of incidents that included getting us on the FBI watch list. The first of which was, me and my brother were kind of like this dynamic duo. And what we did is we made these high voltage electronics that went up to 1,000,000 volts. And we made it, but we also managed to blow the entire transformer for our neighborhood. And it was this massive explosion of light and fire, and we were like, holy cow, that's pretty neat. And then the neighbors come over, and they're like, so what happened to our electricity? Any ideas? And we're like, oh no, those electrical companies, really, really shifty nowadays, aren't they? And then, later on, I was really interested in the cholera epidemic. So I went online, ordered some cholera, surprisingly easy to do. And next thing you know, I'm culturing E. coli and cholera where we make our sandwiches in the morning. And I had a reason for this because where we made sandwiches was right next to our stovetop, and I just kind of sterilized my equipment there and then culture them, and nothing bad happened. There was no cholera epidemic in Maryland, but my dad did have to take a break from work for 2 weeks as he recovered. And then the final straw was really when me and my brother managed to make nitroglycerin, which is a high-powered liquid explosive on our kitchen countertop. So what we did is we first made pure fuming nitric acid in a 5-gallon Gatorade jug. And it's really strong stuff. It's evaporating. That's how strong this acid is. And so we're running around oh, crap. And then we managed to get into the little cylinder, that the graduated cylinder we're using. And then we made nitroglycerin, and we made a miscalculation because we ended up with 1 liter of it. And we tested it out, and 1 drop was enough to make a shockwave that knocked both of us off our foot and blew up a brick. So you can imagine what a leader would do. And so me and my brother are like, oh, Jesus, like our parents are coming back. Oh, my gosh, we have to hide this. But also our inquiring minds wanted to know how big of a blast this would make. So our devious solution was to just toss it off our back porch. And that's the story of how I got a 40-foot crater and blew 3 trees up in my backyard. And then additionally what we did is we decided, because we wanted to test a new way to detect radiation, and so we somehow got, through sketchy Russian back channels, a big vat of uranium. And we really didn't expect it to come, but you really can't blame us. It was 50% off. It was a real steal. But then what happened is the next day, we got a search warrant from the FBI, and now we're on really good terms with these FBI agents. They come over every month. We have tea. We have like scones. We send them Christmas cards. So if you ever want the in to the FBI, just make some nitroglycerin uranium, and you're good. But my mom was not so keen on this idea of me continuing my track record of doing cancer research on our kitchen countertop. So she was like, no, you have to find a lab. And I thought, easy peasy, I can find a lab, no problem. I mean, like, after all, this is a good idea. Someone will accept me. And so I emailed 200 professors at NIH and Johns Hopkins University, and I expected all these positive responses to pour in. I'd get to, like, pick and choose my lab. And then reality struck, and I got 199 rejections. And I realized professors, they're not nearly as nice as those glowing profile pictures make them seem online. Like, they'd rip my procedure apart, but finally, one of them, Dr. Maitra, accepted me into his lab at Johns Hopkins University. And I go in for this big interview, climb my most professional attire of sweatpants and a hoodie. I'd just come from swim practice, so my hair was a hot mess. Go in, expecting like a normal interview, like, oh, what do you want to be when you grow up? What's your favorite subject? No, this guy has like PhD in nanomedicine and proceeded to grill me for 2 hours on every aspect of my project. And I had no clue what he was saying most of the time because my knowledge of cancer biology was a 6-month crash course I had given myself online. However, I eventually somehow answered all of his questions and got into the lab and started doing my research. And that's when I realized I was possibly the worst person at cancer research. Like, I screwed up every imaginable cancer research procedure. Like, I would blow my cells up, or I accidentally sneezed in them on the first day, and I proceeded to make this like weird monster out of like fungus and like bacteria into like my new lab pet called Bob. But he died once Dr. Maitra saw what I was doing, and he's like, a cleaning inspection is coming tomorrow, and oh my God, why'd I invite him to my lab? What is this monstrosity? Get it out. And so we proceeded to have a very nice, elegant ceremony of a funeral out at the dumpster for Bob. However, I continued on, and I screwed up every single procedure. Like, there wasn't a procedure that I could get right on the first try. But after 7 months of that, I finally ended up with this one small paper sensor that costs 3 cents and takes 5 minutes to run. This makes it over 26,000 times less expensive, 168 times faster, and 400 times more sensitive than our current methods of detection. But also, it can detect these cancers in the earliest stage, when something has close to 100% chance of survival. And so far, it has over 90% accuracy at detecting these cancers. So in the next 2 to 5 years, this patent-pending sensor could lift the once dismal pancreatic cancer survival rates from 5.5% to close to 100%. And it would do similar for ovarian and lung cancer. But it could be broadly extended to virtually any disease, ranging from Alzheimer's, other forms of cancer, even HIV/AIDS and heart disease. The possibilities are literally endless. And now what we're doing is we're currently in talks with a bunch of different biotech companies and pharmaceutical companies about getting this device on the market as soon as possible. So we're licensing and developing it to make sure that it's as accurate as possible. And as I kind of moved on from this project, I began to kind of focus on a second aspect of this cancer problem. And that was therapy. Because we now have a way to detect these cancers, now we wanted to treat them. However, that's a bit of a tricky question because these cancer cells are really good at disguising themselves in your blood and in your body. And so there's been this new kind of trend in medicine called programmable therapies. And this is basically where you can program a therapy to go straight to the cancer and deliver its payload only to that cancer. And this is great. You get more bang for your buck in terms of medicine. You're able to use less medicine for better decreases in cancer mass. Also, you decrease the chance of you getting chemo resistance or developing resistance to that drug. And then also, you reduce all those side effects of these therapies. And so I decided to take this idea of programmable therapies to the absolute extreme, and I decided to create an entirely new class of what are called nanorobots. And these are super small robots that you program using DNA and a bit of clever chemistry. And so what they'll do is they'll go into your bloodstream and act as heat-seeking missiles, go directly to the site of your cancer, deliver the treatment, and then what they can actually do is through the programming of these DNA and chemistries, you can actually do something called machine learning, where these nanorobots will learn over time how best to treat your cancer, optimizing the doses of 5 different chemotherapy reagents, and thus personalizing your cancer therapy and making sure it's the best possible therapy for your cancer. And that's not the only thing they can do. They can actually deliver what are called CRISPR reagents and do what's genetic surgery on your cells. And so they can add or delete genes at will. So I can make your cancer cells go green so surgery could see them, or I can make them easier to treat by knocking down chemo-resistance genes. So these nanorobots are a really powerful tool. But as I was developing them, I began to realize that I was falling unwittingly into this single narrative of medicine. And this is the second, probably most important takeaway of this talk, is this single narrative of medicine that currently exists. And it's that medicine ends at the clinic doors. That your role as a doctor is really only diagnosing and treating a patient, and once they've left your clinic doors, that's it, you're done. And as I began delving into this new line of research, I began to challenge this framing of medicine a bit more and more. Because a doctor's role isn't quite, or shouldn't quite be, just diagnosing and treating a patient. It should go far beyond that. And this kind of rationale began in the most unexpected of places, a completely unrelated field, water. And I've always been interested in water ever since I was a little kid. My parents would bring me up to the Cheat River in West Virginia. How many West Virginians do we have here? Anyone? Go Mountaineers. And so I'd go up to the Cheat River, and my parents moonlighted as raft guides, so I was always around water. And what happened is the Cheat River is super contaminated. There was a saying that if you jump in the Cheat River with a cold, you'll come out without it because the contaminants are so powerful that they'll kill your virus. I'm not sure of the science of that, but I tried it once and it worked out. And so I always had this keen interest in water and water pollution. It was kind of always at the back of my mind. And when I developed this new biosensor for pancreatic cancer, I began to think, how can I apply this to water detection of these water contaminants? And what resulted from that was a little strip of paper the size of a postage stamp, and it detects 28 different water contaminants in less than a minute for less than a penny. You dip it in the water, you take it out, and you can instantly see what's in your water. And then you can snap a picture of that using a cell phone camera, pretty ubiquitous around the world, text it, and it'll instantly send back these results of what's in your water. But also geotag and timestamp that data point, such that I can create this interactive map of the pollution in your area over time. And then what you can do is using algorithms is you can actually pinpoint exactly where certain contaminants are coming from and hold polluters accountable. However, now I want to actually test this out because the real world is a lot different than my lab. And so I traveled to what's called the Tarimi district, which is in the northernmost parts of Tanzania, and it's a mining district. And what happened is after structural adjustment in the 1980s to 1990s, the environmental monitoring capabilities cratered. There's really no way to monitor your water here. But also there's endemic poverty and illiteracy. And so I went there with my little water kit, and within the course of 3 short months, we were able to collect over 500,000 data points and also hold over 100 polluters accountable for polluting the water, for releasing these contaminants into the water. And you might be wondering, what on earth does this have to do with medicine? Water is so far from medicine. But actually, these two factors are intricately linked. Because at the same time that I was doing this research, I was volunteering at a clinic in my free time in Tanzania. And over the course of that 3-month period, now is 2-month anniversary of that program, diarrheal disease incidence went down. Also, infectious disease incidence went down. Across the board, health parameters increased and improved. And in fact, now, disease burden in the Turomi district is down 5%. That's a massive amount. Typically, we struggled to get 1% over a decade. We were doing 5% in large part to this intervention. And so you can see that very distant factors such as water can have a huge impact on your health. However, in the single story of medicine, where you're only really looking at the tests that you run and the treatment that you prescribe, we often ignore these more systemic factors of things like water, and even factors that are more closely related to healthcare. And to illustrate this, I'm going to ask you all a question. How many of you guys heard about Ebola? Right? It was a big deal. I mean, it's the largest Ebola epidemic of all time. 28,000 people got infected. 11,000 died. And so we often think of these epidemics as very single discrete events. For example, the Ebola epidemic was from 2014 to 2016, and that was it. But epidemics are actually a combination of many factors interacting over time, over decades, to create a perfect storm. And so basically what my research now focuses on is investigating these factors, what they are, and how they interact to create epidemics. And what happened here in Sierra Leone, Guinea, and Liberia, which was the region where Ebola was most prevalent, was we poured in $1.7 billion to the region in the decade leading up to Ebola. And this was great, because the region had just emerged from this devastating civil war. It was super bloody. It devastated all of the healthcare infrastructure and left many of the doctors abandoning the region. But what wasn't so great is that the vast majority of this money didn't go to repairing hospitals and clinics or training doctors. Rather, because of a big push by a lot of organizations from the Bush administration to the UN Foundation and the World Health Organization, we really focused in these three countries on 3 diseases: HIV, malaria, and tuberculosis, the big 3. And in fact, $1.5 billion of that $1.7 billion went exclusively to those diseases. And that left a paltry $20 million, that tiny dot right there. That's all that went to repairing hospitals and clinics. And so what happened is, because of the structure, we entered the Ebola epidemic, those countries that entered the Ebola epidemic on their last leg. For example, in Sierra Leone, there were 60 doctors for 6 million people. And we see again this single narrative of medicine, where these organizations, they decide to treat the symptom of HIV, malaria, and tuberculosis rates, rather than treating these more systemic effects that impact your health. And because of that, we increase the severity of the epidemic by many-fold. One could easily argue that if we had made the proper investments, long-term, long-lasting investments, treating the actual disease of poverty, endemic illnesses, no health infrastructure, if we had treated that instead, the epidemic could have been contained far quicker. And so if there's one lesson I want you to take from this conference, it's this: that we need to deviate from this single story of medicine. Because healthcare doesn't end at the clinic doors. Health and wellness extend far beyond that, impacting each and every aspect of our lives, from the water we drink and the air we breathe, to how we invest in healthcare infrastructures and battle the scourge of poverty. It's our job as doctors, both current and emerging, to recognize the reality of these systemic factors and realize that our job goes far beyond simply diagnosing and treating illnesses in our clinics. It includes activism for better and more affordable access to healthcare. It includes working for cleaner water and air for our patients. And most importantly, it includes being defiant and courageous in the face of adversity and those who would tell us otherwise. This is the unspoken oath that you take when you enter medicine. It's the Hippocratic Oath. And now is the time to act on this, because we can no longer afford to confine ourselves to the ivory towers of our clinics and hospitals. Now's the time to go out there. Now's the time to act. And now's the time to change this narrative and change the world. And that's up to you to do. Thank you, and enjoy the conference.
Jack! Give it up!